Nolan Porter checked his watch for the 7th time in 10 minutes. It was 9:20 on Christmas Eve, and the reserved seat across from him at La Meridienne looked embarrassingly barren. A folded napkin, a single polished fork, a place set as if waiting for some invisible guest. Rain had turned to crystalline snow outside the broad restaurant windows. Inside, chandeliers blinked like distant constellations. Around him, couples clinked glasses and traded laughter like small private fireworks. Nolan sipped the wine he didn't want and practiced the smile he never enjoyed. He had built an empire with cool decisions, crisp suits, and a calendar that moved like a chessboard. He closed deals the way other people breathed. Yet tonight, the numbers felt meaningless. Tonight, he felt like a man who had learned how to control everything but the ache of a lonely holiday. He had agreed to a blind date arranged by Amanda, his assistant, a favor to a friend, a concession to his mother, a test of whether he could still let someone in. He had imagined conversation that would thread him back to ordinary warmth. He had not imagined the alarm clock of silence. His phone vibrated against his wrist. Amanda checking in. He typed a quick reply and set it face down. He had called once, then twice. Each call went to the same voicemail, flat and honest. He told himself it was fine, that people were late, that city transit had a way of eating plans, but the chill in his chest said otherwise. He pushed his hands into the pockets of his coat and tried to recall why he'd wanted to feel wanted again. That's when she arrived. She moved through the restaurant with the quiet authority of someone who belonged to no one and to everyone all at once. Brown hair in a messy bun, a few loose strands haloed by the warm lights, a black shirt under a burgundy apron, bell-shaped earrings that chimed softly when she leaned forward, a small, oddly charming music in a place of curated silence. She carried a notepad, but not the posture of someone rehearsed. She had the kind of grin that suggested a secret joke at the world. Nina saw him because she watched everything. She had an eye for the people who turned a table into a stage. She paused, pen looping on paper, and said, "Hi, sorry for the delay. You decide what you want for dinner, or are you waiting longer for the invisible guest?" Nolan looked up, startled by her directness. There was an easy warmth in her voice, a note that suggested she expected life to be ridiculous and had chosen to laugh at it. For a second, he simply registered the laugh line crease near one eye and the way her bell earrings gleamed. Then, because he was Nolan Porter, and because old habits died slow, he made a dry joke about being stood up and tried to keep the composure that executives wore like a second skin. Instead of retreating, Nina tossed him an opinion like a lifeline. "Blind date turned dark date," she declared, hands on hips. "That's cruelty. It should be illegal on holidays. Real jail. Not the tiny city kind. The dramatic kind with stripes." He found himself laughing, unexpectedly and freely. It felt ridiculous to laugh at someone else's effort at humor, and yet something about how she called it made his shoulders drop an inch. The restaurant's ambient music filled the spaces she left between the jokes. Other servers drifted like background rhythm. Nina had the knack of saying exactly what would take the edge off, of translating social awkwardness into something manageable. "So what happened?" she asked, leaning in as if she'd been handed the script of his life. Was she abducted by aliens, or did she get a better invitation to be in a rom-com? "Neither," Nolan said. "Traffic probably swallowed her." He told the small lie with the practiced inflection of someone used to smoothing things over. Nina snorted. "Traffic. That's what humans say when they don't want to admit someone ghosted them. Look, I have metrics. Anyone who disappears without a message is in one of two categories. Either they were abducted or they don't care. And Chicago doesn't have that many UFO fans." "You monitor a lot of people?" he asked, smiling despite himself. "Not monitor," she corrected with a wink. "I observe. There's a difference. Watching is what stalkers do. Monitoring is a professional responsibility." She tapped her pad as if it proved a point. "I'm Nina. This restaurant is my territory." Nolan. The name felt foreign when it slipped out. He told himself that he should have left 10 minutes ago. He told himself to get up, hail a cab, and spend the night with the lights of his apartment, and a documentary about market trends. He didn't move. She returned moments later with a basket of warm bread, placed it like a small truce on the table, and announced with a dramatic whisper, "Complimentary, chef-sanctified bread. I convinced him you had the worst night ever, and he cried." "It worked," she grinned. "Also tiramisu, on the house, therapy and sugar." It was absurd. It was a reckless kindness. Nolan, who had seen 1,000 people bend toward him for reasons that had names of commissions and photo ops, felt the tug of something more human. She had risked a tiny rebellion for a stranger, and that was not in his ledger of expected outcomes. They talked. For 45 minutes, the restaurant shrank until it was just him and her, and the vase of wilting roses on the next table. She poked gentle holes in his careful lines, teased him about his default executive smile, guessed his coffee order, and then, when he admitted the truth about wanting a company of people for Christmas, she got serious. "Don't spend tomorrow alone," she said. The words were only a breath, but they landed in a place Nolan had been keeping locked for years. "If you want," she added, almost as an afterthought, "come to my house. My mom makes too much turkey, and my little sister thinks Mario Kart is an Olympic sport. Dinner at 6, Maple Street. Bring nothing, just yourself." It was absurd again, but this time the absurdity leaned toward possibility. Nolan imagined a great house of echoing halls and polished floors, the cities of his childhood, and then he pictured something softer. Mismatched plates, kids with flour on their noses, a television with a stubborn Mario Kart cartridge wedged into it. He imagined the small, human textures of a life he'd left at some point for ledgers and skyscrapers. He took the napkin she scribbled the address on like a relic. The ink smudged at the edge where her thumb had lingered. Outside suoi, through the picture window, the first real snow began to fall, soft and patient, turning the world into something more forgiving. Before he left, he hesitated. There were business calls and a holiday email chain and reasons, practical and reasonable, to continue being the man who handled crisis and avoided spontaneity. Amanda would ask why he'd chosen to spend the evening in a small house instead of at the holiday board meeting. Investors would raise eyebrows. His mother would start her gentle litany of concerned questions. The calculus was familiar. Nina stood with her pen tucked behind her ear. "So?" she said, not impatient but expectant. "Pop quiz. You coming, or are you going to rehearse more for another 17 minutes and then text, 'Sorry, I got held up'?" Nolan laughed, the laugh of someone who had decided, or who had been surprised into deciding. "I'm coming," he said. The word felt dangerously simple and entirely correct. She clapped. The bell earrings chimed like small triumph. "Great. Bring a bottle if you want, but nothing crazy. My mom drinks boxed wine and thinks it's a personality trait. Promise me you won't show up in a tux." He pictured himself folding into a cheap chair and not into a press release. He pictured someone who would not notice the brand of his watch, but would notice whether he joined in the karaoke battle over dessert. The idea scared and thrilled him in the same breath. He walked out into the falling snow with the napkin warm in his jacket pocket. The city lights smeared with the wet glitter of December. He felt a strange lightness he had not felt in years, not the wind of risk markets or the adrenaline of a good acquisition, but the fragile lift of something dangerously close to hope. What's about to come next is a house full of laughter, 2 cats who think they own the couch, and a family that will test whether a man cloaked in suits can unlearn his armor. Will Nolan arrive as a stranger, or will he come as someone willing to be seen? If you're already rooting for them, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. And stay with me. What's about to come next will change everything. Nolan folded the napkin into his palm like it was a map to a strange new country. The snow had turned the city into a postcard smear. Headlights threw long, lazy reflections across wet pavement. He walked the block to Maple Street with the same sure stride he used in boardrooms, but his mind was noisy with little questions. What if he said the wrong thing? What if he didn't laugh at the right time? What if he arrived as the billionaire everyone expected and ruined whatever gentle chaos he'd been invited into? He stood for a breath at 4:23, watching the inflatable snowman bob in the front yard like a guardian of domestic misrule. The house looked like every small house holiday card he'd ignored growing up. String lights a little crooked, a wreath a little lopsided, an upstairs window aglow with someone wrapping presents poorly at 3 in the afternoon. For the first time in years, the polished steel of his life felt strange against that warmth. He rang the bell. The door flew open as if it had been waiting for him. Nina practically collided with him in the doorway, cheeks flushed from the cold, and from the excitement of proving to her mother she was right. She wore a ridiculous red sweater with a stitched reindeer whose nose actually lit up. Her hair was messier than it had been the night before, ribbons of flour maybe in the bun, a little smear of something on her apron that could have been sauce, or a battle scar from the kitchen. "You came," she practically sang. "I thought you'd back out. My mom said you would, but my mom also thought I was dating the guy from the deli for 2 years, so adjust expectations." Nolan laughed before he'd decided to. He realized that the sound made something in him unclench. He handed over the bottle of wine he'd convinced himself was adequately humble. She gasped in mock horror when she saw the label. "Oh my God, French," she breathed, as though every worldly treasure had just been delivered to an unassuming Michigan living room. "We'll put it next to the boxed wine so they get to know each other." Her mother, Karen, wiped her hands on a flour-dusted towel and enveloped Nolan in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and detergent. She had the same shade of hair as Nina, softer and eyes that crinkled with practiced welcome. "You must be Nolan," she said, pulling back to inspect him like a neighbor checking a new mailbox. "Do come in. Don't be shy. Call me Carol. You look like you're about to be invited to a spy meeting. Relax. You're among people who will tell you the truth about gravy." From the top of the stairs, a high-energy voice called, "Is this the guy who got stood up and then went to my sister's place because she's a walking miracle?" Lily, 17 and a hurricane in a Grinch sweater, bounded down, cookie plate in hand. She circled Nolan with the confidence of a younger sibling auditioning for a role in someone's life. "He looks normal. Like, suspiciously normal. Is he interestingly awkward or interestingly rich?" "Both," Nina said, and shoved a playful elbow into Nolan's ribs. He entered into the warmth like somebody stepping into a photograph. The living room held mismatched sofas, a tree that smelled like pine in a way you could drink, and a television tucked between knickknacks. Mr. Whiskers, an orange cat who owned a proud ring around the coffee table, leapt onto Nolan's lap without consulting him. He froze for half a second, startled by the agency of a creature who would assume ownership of anything with a lap and a heart. "Mr. Whiskers is the judge of souls," Carol announced, amused. "He's very discerning. You pass for now." They settled at a table that had been extended with a stray door rescued and painted. The feast was a lovely riot. A bird browned just enough to make smoke-scented promises to the napkin. Mashed potatoes that defied his sensible dietary habits. Casseroles bubbling with history, and a pie sheet that glistened like a secret. There was no fine china, but there were plates that gleamed with a home-polished sheen. The cranberry sauce had an honesty to it Nolan had never appreciated in jars. Conversation moved like jazz, offbeat, and somehow exactly right. Carol invented a toast that required each person to say one thing they were grateful for that year. The request felt deceptively intimate. Gratitude, Nolan realized, was an invitation to be ordinary. Nina's turn came, and she grinned, eyes bright. "I am grateful for people who sit through my bad jokes." She looked at Nolan then, like the joke had a private, loving punchline. "And for this house that keeps growing." Lily said something dumb and brilliant about learning a new streaming dance, and promised to show someone 50 moves before dessert. Carol, with a wink that had the authority of a clinking spoon, said she was grateful for hot water heaters that don't explode, and friends who help you hide the ugly sweaters. When it came to Nolan, something in the room hummed quieter. He'd never been selected into a gratitude circle like this before. His life's celebrations had always been polished to a press release sheen. He swallowed and spoke haltingly at first. The words were honest and tasted like odd fruit on his tongue. "I'm grateful," he said, "for the year I learned how to stop assuming the only way to feel safe is by controlling every variable. It's been a hard lesson." Silence softened into a warmth that felt less like judgment and more like curiosity. Carol reached across and patted his hand. "Baby steps," she said. "Bring the goods next time. Cookies." Later, the room collapsed into the kind of competitive silliness that belonged only to families who fought like people practicing for intimacy. Lily plugged in the old console. "Mario Kart," she declared. "Forging alliances and breaking hearts since 1992. A couch cleared with theatrical speed. Someone fetched a spare controller. Mr. Whiskers relocated to the window in protest. Nolan, who had built his life on the logic of market algorithms and the obedience of timelines, found himself placed in front of an ancient TV screen with a controller that smelt of previous victories. He had never particularly enjoyed video games. They felt like exercises in surrendering to rules that did not benefit him. But Lily's grin had a way of making surrender look like a dance move. He was garbage at first. He took a turn too wide and slid into a bush. His cart spun like a confused coin. Nina laughed until she hiccuped and then leaned over to give him pointers. "Not the banana peel that looks like guilt," as if steering a digital character could translate to steering an awkward human toward laughter. The humiliation was complete when he was intentionally bumped off the road by a gleeful Lily, who squealed with success. Nolan's face went red, then amused, then morphous into something like release. He started to laugh at himself, a real laugh, tangled with the room's chorus. The sound felt less like evidence of weakness, and more like proof of being alive. They played until dessert became a raucous cheering section. The living room felt like water warmed to the temperature of confessions, safe and buoyant. He noticed Nina in these moments, the way she watched people when they were most themselves, the lean of her shoulder when she laughed, the soft crease by her eye when she was listening to someone else's story. There was an economy of care in her gestures that had nothing to do with influence or charm. It was pure attention, and it made him feel seen in a way he had not allowed himself to be. After the game, as Carol busied herself with plates and Lily explained, in excruciating detail, her plan to beat an impossible level, Nina came up beside Nolan and said, quietly, as if revealing something small and luminous, "I'm grateful you came." The sentence hung in the air, simple as a bell. Nolan could have let it pass as the evening's glitter. Instead, he felt an unsteady desire to unpack that gratitude, to return it whole. "I'm grateful for something small," he said. "When I was a kid, my father used to tell me that everything you let people see of you should be perfect, that if anyone ever had to see the flaws, they'd run. I believed him for a long time. I thought if I looked untouchable, then I couldn't be hurt." Nina's fingers folded around her mug, her eyes softened like wet soil. "That's a lonely shelter," she said, "and very easy to forget you're in." He looked at her, at the way the light picked up the edges of her earring bells, and realized that what he'd built to keep people out had, in fact, kept him from small human cords that tethered people to each other. The shield had been doing its job too well. They sat with that for a beat. The room filled with the banalities of family chatter, a claim of policy about who got the last biscuit, a debate about the correct way to peel tangerines. It was ordinary, and therefore extraordinary. At some point, someone proposed a New Year's plan, a modest gathering at a small lodge upstate. Nothing fancy, maybe a bonfire. Nolan found himself musing aloud, without irony, about actually attending something that was not scheduled by his office. The idea had the weight of a promise. Nina scribbled on a napkin and then slid it across the table to him with a flourish that suggested mischief and habit both. "This is my number," she said, eyes bright. "Come tomorrow. We might do a little after-Christmas cleanup that involves gift wrap and 3-tiered cookies. You can bring your French wine to show it for a moment of cultural exchange." He lifted the napkin and felt the indent of her handwriting. It was small, circular, the way someone who wrote numbers while moving on a tray might do. At that tiny, ordinary signature, his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, a small, mechanical trumpet of another life. Nolan's thumb hovered over the screen without looking. "Amanda. Urgent. Investor on line 2. He knew the cadence of that buzz. It had the sharpness of priorities rearranging themselves. The buzz felt, in that instant, like a question thrown across two worlds. Nina watched him, a question reflected in her gaze. What matters more, the meeting scheduled and ensured, or the house full of laughter where a battered couch could become a place to rest? The room around them continued with its joyful noise, but at the center, a choice hummed. If you're loving this, drop a like and tell us where you'd celebrate Christmas. A big city penthouse or a house with a crooked wreath? What would you choose? Nolan stared at the screen, then at the napkin, then at Nina's hand lightly resting near his. He felt the orbit of his life tilt, just a fraction. The call waiting on his phone was a summons to resume the armor. The napkin was an invitation to learn how to take it off. What's about to come next? Will Nolan step into the emergency and keep his distance, or will he put the phone away and choose to stay in a living room that has no room for press releases, but plenty of room for people? The snow from Christmas Day lingered like powdered sugar on rooftops and sidewalks, softening the hard edges of the city. Nolan woke the next morning with a strange, buoyant ache, the kind that suggested something important had shifted in him. He lay still for a moment, replaying fragments of Nina's world. The tinsel-tangled living room, Carol's warm hands on his shoulders, Lily screaming in triumph as she passed him on the Mario Kart track, the way Nina's eyes softened when she whispered gratitude into a room of mismatched chairs. He checked his phone before he got out of bed. No urgent messages, no investor alarms. Just a text from Nina. Nina, morning, if you don't have breakfast plans, I know a bakery that sells cinnamon rolls bigger than your head. Yes, I measured once. Don't judge me. He stared at the message for 3 seconds before responding. Nolan. Lead the way. The day unfolded with the ease of a movie montage. The tiny bakery on Elm Street smelled like heaven and chaos. Nolan and Nina squeezed into a small table against the frosted window. She had flour on her sweater again. He wore a navy coat and an expression halfway between wonder and amusement as he tried to cut into the enormous cinnamon roll she swore by. You're holding the knife like it's a corporate merger, Nina teased. I'm trying not to get icing on my shirt. You're impossible. It's icing. It's supposed to be everywhere. She proved her point by swiping a bit of cinnamon glaze across his cheek with a grin. He wiped it off, failing to look stern and looking even less stern when she laughed. A cafe on 12th Street. Nolan carefully pronounced the name of Nina's favorite drink. Cappuccino with extra foam, dash of cinnamon, 2 shots of... Love, Nina interrupted, placing a hand over her heart dramatically. The drink must have love. Nolan raised an eyebrow. There's no love listed on the menu. That's because you don't order it, she whispered. You radiate it. He shook his head, but his eyes were warm. She nudged his coffee toward him. It's okay. I'll teach you. It was cold enough to freeze tears, but Nina insisted there was something magical about eating ice cream in winter. He didn't believe her, until he watched her hold a cup of chocolate swirl under the streetlights, laughing as flakes of snow dusted her hair. You're ridiculous, he said. You're welcome, she replied. Nolan's skate sliced the ice like a malfunctioning robot. He fell within the first minute. Hard. Nina skated over, barely containing her laughter. Oh no, the mighty CEO has fallen. There's a structural flaw in the ice, he insisted. Yeah, she nodded, deadpan. Gravity. She extended a hand. He took it. And for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the warmth of her grip. When he managed to stay upright for a full lap, she clapped dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, Nolan Porter has achieved balance. Miracles do exist. He bowed. She bowed lower. They toppled over together in a graceless heap. And that's when Nolan laughed the hardest he had in years. If you're loving this sweet chaos so far, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment your favorite winter date idea, because what's about to come next will melt or break your heart. Their voices intertwined through speakerphones and soft lamplight. Nina told stories about customers who came in angry but left happy, about Lily's obsession with dancing, about her mom's strange ability to smell when someone was lying. Nolan told her about cities he'd visited, people he'd met, how the view from his penthouse looked like a photograph he couldn't touch. "You know," Nina said softly, "you sound lonely when you talk about those things." And he realized she was right. The week wasn't only warm lights and ice cream. Nolan's other life tugged at him with insistent hands. The boardroom was chrome and glass, the table long enough to seat a small army. Nolan leaned over a presentation, but his mind drifted to cinnamon rolls and ice skating disasters. "Nolan?" his CFO asked. He blinked. "Yes?" "You zoned out. Are you feeling okay?" He forced a nod, but his phone buzzed. "Nina, look, I made a snowman, but he looks like he's paying taxes." A picture followed. A lopsided snowman with a worried face. Nolan smiled, actually smiled, in the middle of the boardroom. Amanda, standing behind him, blinked in surprise. Amanda walked with him between meetings. "You're different," she said carefully. "How so?" "You smile now." "Was I not smiling before?" "You smiled like you were trying not to get sued," she replied. "Now you smile like you're actually happy." He didn't deny it. His brother, Landon Porter, called. "Nolan, Christmas miracle. You picking up the phone. Listen, everyone's flying to Aspen for New Year's Eve this year. Mom wants you there early." Nolan hesitated. Aspen, mansion, guests, reporters, social icebergs. And then he thought of Nina. "I'll think about it," he said. "You've been avoiding us for months. Just show up, okay? And hey, bring someone if you want." Nolan froze. Bring someone. What would Nina think if he offered? Back at La Meridienne, Nina dodged between tables like a cheerful comet. Chef Romano poked his head out of the kitchen. "Did you tell another customer it was their birthday when it wasn't?" "It got you to give free tiramisu, didn't it?" he groaned. "One day I will fire you just to see your reaction." "You'd cry and beg me to stay," she shot back. He muttered something in Italian that sounded suspiciously affectionate. At home, Nina helped her mom fold laundry, argued with Lily about something trivial, and tried to coax Captain Cuteness, the Shire cat, out from under the bed. Life wasn't easy. There were bills. Her car engine made noises like a dying accordion. Tips varied wildly, but she found joy in things that cost nothing: laughter, warmth, shared meals. And now, Nolan. She didn't want to think too hard about that part. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening. Nina was wiping down tables after closing when Nolan walked in, coat dusted with snow. "I thought you were working late," she said. "I was," he replied. "But I wanted to see you." He handed her a tiny velvet pouch. Nina opened it to reveal a small charm, a golden bell, like her earrings. Her eyes widened. "Nolan, this is beautiful, but I can't accept something fancy." "It's not fancy. It's small, and I thought of you when I saw it." She stared at him, unsure, then softened. "Okay, but only because it jingles." She clipped it onto her bracelet. When she moved, it chimed softly. Walking her home afterward, they passed a street decorated in lights, glowing icicles, reindeer, candy canes. Nina shivered. He offered his scarf. She accepted. "Hey," she said softly. "Thank you, for today." "For what part?" "All of it." She leaned up and kissed his cheek, a soft, warm brush that turned his breath into chaos. He exhaled slowly. "That felt dangerous." "Good dangerous or bad dangerous?" she teased. "Both," she grinned. "I like both." The week stitched them together like lights on a garland, slowly, carefully, brilliantly. But reality always catches up. "Hey," Landon said. "Mom is insisting you bring someone to Aspen. A girlfriend, if possible. Is there anyone you're seeing?" Nolan hesitated. His mind flashed through their week. Cinnamon rolls, skating falls, the soft kiss, her bell charm. "Yes," he said quietly. "There is." Landon whistled. "Well, bring her. Aspen's perfect for romance." Nina arrived early at the restaurant for her shift the next day. She walked into the hallway leading to the staff room and froze. 2 customers sat near the entrance, whispering loudly. "Did you see that billionaire guy who came in here the other night?" "Yeah, Nolan Porter. That man owns half the tech sector." "And he's hanging around with her? She's sweet, but she's just a waitress. Can you imagine?" "He'll get bored. They always do." Nina stepped back, the words slicing deeper than she expected. Just a waitress. The phrase clung to her like ice. When Nolan stepped into the restaurant 15 minutes later, smiling like she'd hung the moon, she forced herself to smile back. But it trembled. He didn't notice. Not yet. "Nina?" he asked softly. "Can we talk?" She stiffened before she could stop herself. "Sure. What's up?" He hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "My family wants me in Aspen for New Year's Eve, and I want you to come with me." Her heart slammed hard. Aspen? His family? Reporters? Wealth that could swallow cities? Her fingers curled around her apron. "That's a lot," she whispered. "I know," he admitted, "but I want you there." She opened her mouth, then closed it, because suddenly she wasn't sure she belonged anywhere near his world. She swallowed hard. "Nolan, I need to think." His smile faltered. "What's about to come next," she whispered, "is bigger than you think." Nolan's breath hitched, because he didn't know whether she would step into his world or run from it. And that is where we leave them tonight. Would you like to know what really happened? 2 worlds collide next. Nina had never been afraid of snow until that Wednesday morning when it glittered too beautifully on her windowsill, as if warning her that nothing beautiful comes without consequences. Nolan stood at her door holding 2 plane tickets and looking like a man trying to breathe evenly. She stared at the tickets like they were live explosives. Aspen?" she repeated, gripping the doorframe for support. "Yes." His voice was steady, but his eyes were hopeful. "With me. For New Year's." She exhaled like someone who'd just sprinted. "Aspen, as in mountains? Rich people? Your family?" He nodded. Nina blinked once, twice, then closed the door behind her so the neighbors wouldn't overhear her panic. "You want me," she said slowly, "to fly on a private jet with you, to celebrate New Year's Eve at a billionaire family mansion?" "Yes." Her knees nearly gave out. "Okay, I'm scared. I know." And flattered. "I hoped so." And terrified. "Nolan, do you have any idea what your family is like?" "Yes, that's why I want you there." She pressed both hands to her cheeks. "And you think I'll survive this?" He stepped closer and touched her wrist gently. "I'll be with you the whole time." Something in that made her heart stop resisting. "Fine," she whispered. "But if I faint on the jet, you're responsible." He laughed softly. "I'll catch you." The next day, Nina found herself in the most intimidating store she'd ever stepped foot inside. A luxury boutique Nolan insisted on visiting, just to look. Just to look. Her foot. She stared at the rows of dresses that probably cost more than her car. They sparkled accusingly. Nina held up a midnight blue gown. "I can't wear this." "Why not?" "Because it looks like someone dipped it in diamonds and whispered a spell over it." "Try it," Nolan insisted. She reluctantly entered the changing room. 2 minutes later, "Nope!" she burst out dramatically. "I look like a chandelier." Nolan tried not to laugh, and failed spectacularly. The next dress was gold. "I look like a trophy." The next was silver. "I look like a wrapped Christmas present, with legs." The next was emerald green. She stepped out slowly this time. It hugged her gently. It made her eyes shine. She looked like herself, but confident, grounded, luminous. Nolan's breath caught. Wow. Is that good wow or bad wow? Best wow of my life. She blushed, fiddling with her purse. Then, maybe this one. When Nolan tried to pay, she nearly slapped his hand away. No, absolutely not. I'll pay for half. Nina, I brought you here. Then let me contribute, she insisted. I don't want to feel like some accessory. His eyes softened. You're not. But Nina wasn't convinced. Not yet. In the car, Nolan attempted to coach her on polite greetings, which turned into a comedy sketch. Okay, so this is how you greet my mother, Nolan said, demonstrating a simple, warm handshake. Nina copied him perfectly, then bumped her elbow on the dashboard. Ow. Are you okay? Yep, nope, I'm good. Totally ready for a high society weekend, she groaned. Don't overthink it, Nolan said gently. They're just people. With holiday homes the size of malls, she muttered. He smiled, unable to hide his amusement. You'll be fine. She tried to believe him. The jet was smoother than anything she'd imagined. The landing even smoother. But the moment they stepped onto the sprawling Porter estate grounds, acres of snow-covered trees, golden-lit windows, a fountain shaped like a frozen phoenix, Nina felt her throat tighten. People live like this? She whispered. Yes, Nolan admitted softly, but it doesn't mean it's better. She wasn't sure she believed him. A small group of staff members greeted them at the entrance. Welcome home, sir, one said with a bow. Nina froze. Bowed? People bowed? A thin, elegant woman approached. Nolan's Aunt Vivian. She radiated wealth the way stars radiated heat. Nolan, she said with a cold smile. So good to see you again. And this must be... Nina, Nolan supplied, stepping protectively closer. Vivian gave a polite but brief glance, the kind used for handbags and passing pedestrians. Charming, she said, which meant the opposite. Nina swallowed hard. Then another presence appeared, tall, glamorous, all red lipstick and designer coat. Madison. Nolan stood up blind date, now smirking like she owned the staircase. Oh, Madison exclaimed. Nolan, you made it, and you brought a friend. Nina's stomach plummeted. Madison's smile sharpened. How adorable. Nolan stiffened. We're not doing this. Oh, come on now, Madison purred. I'm simply saying hello. But her eyes said everything else. You don't belong here. He'll get tired of you. This world will eat you alive. Nina tried not to wilt under that gaze. Nolan's mother, Elaine Porter, appeared in the entryway like a gentler breeze. She was beautiful, refined, elegant, in a quiet way. Mom, Nolan said. This is Nina. Elaine smiled warmly. Nina, welcome. Nolan's told me wonderful things. Nina brightened. He has? Elaine nodded. Come, let me get you both something warm to drink. But before they could escape, the probing began. A cousin. So, Nina, what do your parents do? An uncle. Where did you go to college? A family friend. You work at... Oh, a restaurant. How quaint. Nina felt her skin go hot. Every answer she gave made someone raise a brow, exchange a glance, smirk. She felt like an exhibit at the museum of people who don't belong. Nolan noticed. He slid a hand to her lower back, grounding her. Don't worry, he whispered. I'm here. But she still felt the walls closing in. Right before dinner, Nolan's phone vibrated. A message from Amanda. Nolan, you need to see this. He opened the link. A tabloid page flashed up. Billionaire Nolan Porter's new Waitress plaything? Publicity stunt? Or rebound romance? Below the headline, a photo taken outside Nina's restaurant. a grainy image of them laughing together. Nolan's face went dark. "This is disgusting," he muttered. His jaw clenched, his eyes hardened. Nina had never seen him furious before. Not like this. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. Nina's heart cracked open painfully. Waitress, plaything, stunt. She felt suddenly small, insignificant, like she was a pawn in someone else's story. "I'm sorry," she whispered, eyes dropping. "No," Nolan said fiercely. "You did nothing wrong." But she wasn't sure she believed him. Not anymore. The dining hall glittered with chandeliers, crystal glasses, and conversations dripping with wealth. Nina sat between Nolan and a cousin who hadn't acknowledged her once. She tried to breathe, tried to smile, tried to hold on to the girl who wore bell earrings and laughed easily, but the whispers were everywhere. "Is she really a waitress?" "Yes." "Nolan always rebels before a big business deal." "She'll disappear. They always do." Nina's chest squeezed painfully. Then she heard it, the final blow. A cousin to another, laughing softly. "A waitress? Really? He must be trying something new." Her chair scraped quietly as she stood. Nolan looked up. "Nina?" "Bathroom," she whispered. But she didn't go to the bathroom. She fled, past the guests, past the quiet hallways, out onto the balcony where the cold mountain wind slapped her cheeks. She pressed her hands to her face. Tears, hot, unstoppable, shame-filled. She had never felt so wrong in her skin. Nolan found her minutes later, breathless, eyes worried. "Nina, hey, what happened?" She couldn't look at him. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "Yes, you do," he said, stepping closer. "No," she said, backing away, voice cracking. "This world is too big, too sharp. I can't breathe." He reached for her hand, but his phone rang. He froze. She knew that ring, the ringtone he used for urgent business calls. He hesitated. She saw it. He hesitated between her and the call. Everything inside Nina crumbled. "Nolan," she whispered. "Go, answer it. It's your world." He looked torn, painfully torn, but the phone rang again. His hand closed around the device. "Nina," he whispered. The wind howled behind them. Inside, the countdown to midnight began. She turned her face away from him so he wouldn't see how much it hurt. And that's where we leave them. On a balcony in Aspen. Midnight approaching. Nina's heart breaking. Nolan's world pulling him from both sides. What's about to come next? Will he fight for her? Or lose her in the noise of his own life? Snow twirled around the Porter estate like the world was celebrating something Nina couldn't feel. Nolan stood frozen on the balcony, phone pressed to his ear, torn cleanly between two worlds. "Nolan?" Amanda's voice was sharp, urgent. "We have a problem. The investors want a statement about the tabloid leak. They think it makes you look impulsive. One of them used the phrase emotional liability. We need you on a call, now." Nolan closed his eyes. Nina stood 3 feet away, hugging herself as if the cold could protect her. He didn't want to choose the call. He wanted to choose her. But Amanda rarely sounded like this, and the word liability punched him hard in the chest. "I'll be right there," he said, voice breaking. The moment the call ended, he turned back to Nina, but she was already walking away. His mind spiraled. On the call, Amanda didn't sugarcoat anything. "The board is panicking," she said. "They're worried the timing looks bad, a relationship popping up right before Q1 restructuring. It reads as unstable. They want you in New York ASAP, without distractions." "Distractions?" he repeated, anger flaring. "You know what they mean," she said quietly. "I'm on your side, Nolan. But the optics are complicated." He hung up before he said something he'd regret. He paced the empty guest room his family had assigned him, heart thundering against his ribs. Every instinct in him screamed to go find Nina, to explain, to hold her, to tell her that none of these people mattered more than she did. But then the fear crept in. If he pushed back now, shareholders could retaliate. If more tabloids ran stories, Nina could get hurt. If he insisted on keeping her in this world, would it destroy her? He buried his hands in his hair. "Why does everything feel wrong?" he whispered to himself. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't just responsible for himself. He was responsible for someone he cared about. While Nolan battled board politics, Nina retreated to the staff hallway, the only quiet place she could find in a mansion built for spectacle. Her phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then kept buzzing. Dozens of notifications flooded her screen, forwarded posts from friends, coworkers, and one message from an unknown number. "Hope you enjoyed your 15 minutes of fame, gold digger." Her stomach twisted painfully. She clicked on a comment thread. This girl? Her? Seriously? Waitress trying to climb the ladder. She'll disappear in a week. Next story. Her breath hitched. Her eyes stung. Then her mom called. "Sweetheart? Lily showed me some things online. Nina, are you okay?" Nina's throat closed. "Mom, I don't think I can do this." "Baby, people can be cruel," Carol said gently. "But just because someone else can't see your worth doesn't mean it's not there." "Mom, they're not just judging me. They're judging Nolan, too. What if I mess everything up for him?" "Honey," Carol said softly, "are you sure you're not out of your depth?" The words were not meant to wound, but they landed like stones. Out of your depth. She ended the call quickly before her mother could hear her cry. The next afternoon, Nolan was forced to attend a small pre-New Year's luncheon with several business partners. The kind of event where conversations floated like perfume, heavy, sharp, layered with judgment. Nina stayed in the bedroom he'd reserved for her. She didn't want to see anyone. She didn't want to breathe the same champagne-scented air as people who saw her as a headline. But Nolan's family insisted she attend. "It will look strange if she hides," Aunt Vivian whispered loudly. So Nina came downstairs, only to walk straight into a trap. Madison approached Nolan, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "Nolan, darling, who would have thought we'd meet like this again?" He stiffened. Nina froze. Madison glanced at Nina with a condescending sort of sweetness. "So, you're still entertaining her?" Still. The word punched Nina in the gut. Nolan stepped closer to Nina. "Madison, this isn't the—" "Oh, please," Madison cut in. "I'm helping you. You need to think about your image. Dating someone from a restaurant? The press will eat you alive. Investors, too." Nina felt the air collapse inside her lungs. Madison leaned in, whispering loudly enough for Nina to hear. "People like her don't survive in a world like yours." Nolan's jaw clenched. "Leave her alone." Madison's smile sharpened. "I'm doing you a favor." Nina didn't hear the rest. She walked out before she turned to Ash. Nolan found her outside 15 minutes later, sitting at the edge of the snowy garden trail, hugging her knees. "Nina," he said, kneeling beside her. "I am so sorry you had to hear that. Madison is... She's right." Her voice cracked, fragile and final. "No, she's not." "Then why does everyone else agree with her?" Nina whispered. "Your family, the press, the investors, the world you live in." Nolan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Am I making things harder for you?" she whispered. He froze, because the truth was complicated, and the hesitation, just a second long, destroyed her. "Oh," she breathed. "You do think I'm a liability." "No," he said instantly. "No, not you. The noise around us, the timing, your image," she said quietly. "Your business." He squeezed his eyes shut. "Nina, I don't want to hurt you." "But you are," she whispered. Nolan felt his heart tear open. "I think," he said slowly, painfully, "we should take a step back. Just until things calm down." Her breath left her body. "A step back?" "It's temporary," he insisted, voice cracking. "Just until the press cools down. Just to keep you safe." She looked at him with disbelief. "You're not protecting me," she said softly. "You're protecting your reputation." His stomach dropped. She stood shakily. Maybe Madison was right. Maybe I am just entertainment. Someone fun for a holiday season. "Nina, I trusted you," she whispered. "I shouldn't have." He stood too, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "Please don't," she said. "Please, don't make this harder." Nolan's throat closed. He wanted to fight harder, to say something true, to throw every investor and family member into the snow, but fear paralyzed him again. And so, in silence, they broke. If you were Nina or Nolan, what would you do next? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe because what's coming next will test their hearts even more. Nina packed quietly. She had no intention of staying another minute in a place that made her feel small. As she zipped her bag, her phone buzzed. A message, a forwarded receipt from the boutique where she'd bought the emerald dress. Her eyebrows knit together. Paid in full, Nolan Porter notes. She'll argue, so process quietly. Her heart twisted. He'd gone behind her back. He'd paid for the dress she'd insisted on buying herself. Her chest tightened. It felt like pity, like charity, like confirmation that she was the poor girl in the story. She didn't see the second message that followed moments later. From Nolan. I wanted you to feel confident. I didn't want you worrying about cost. I'm sorry if it came off wrong. I should have told you. She didn't see it because she was already walking out the front door, head down, tears freezing on her cheeks. Nolan ran out moments later. Nina, wait! But she was already halfway down the driveway, suitcase dragging behind her like a wounded animal. Nina! She didn't turn around. He took a step forward, but his phone rang again. Another urgent investor call. The world tugging at him without mercy. He stood there, trapped, watching the woman he loved walk away into the snow. And that's where we leave them. Separated. Misunderstanding boiling. Hearts breaking under pressure neither of them deserved. What's about to come next? Will Nolan fight for her, or lose her to the silence he allowed? Snow had thinned to a dirty memory on the sidewalks of the city. Life, for both of them, resumed its clumsy, relentless forward march, but they moved in different directions, each trying to figure out who they were without the other's shadow. Nina worked like someone rebuilding a house room by room. The first week after Aspen, she disappeared into the rhythms she knew. The click of heels on kitchen tiles, the hiss of steam, the ranting and laughter of regulars at the counter. She took extra shifts because the hours kept her from thinking, and oddly, because the extra cash felt like a small proof that she could stand without leaning on anyone who wore suits. But she also did something else she'd been meaning to do for years. She started baking pies to sell on weekends. It began as a small rebellion. 3 apple pies, a few lemon tarts, a promise to herself that she wouldn't let this sorrow make her stop making things she loved. She bought a worn wooden crate from a thrift store and painted her bakery sign on a scrap of wood. Nina's Nook, Pies and Smiles. It was crooked and perfect. Her mother helped at first, then Lily, who insisted on making a misleading number of Instagram posts about the Pie Queen. They set up a little table outside the church hall the first Saturday, the pies wrapped in twine, steam still soft against the paper. The first sale was a local postal worker who paid for 2 pies with a handshake and a story about his granddaughter. These taste like my mother used to make, he said, his voice crinkling. Nina felt something warm and human shift inside her chest, recognition that her work gave other people comfort. She hadn't realized comfort could be a currency as honest as cash. She took a double night shift that week and slept in small parts, 2 hours, then a nap, then a crust to roll. Every time she thought of Nolan, she felt a twist of pain, but she layered the hurt with new action. She volunteered at the community kitchen on Tuesdays, doling out soup and conversation. The kitchen became a place where bruises turned into recipes and shame softened into exchange. Someone handing her back a smile in return for a warm bowl. A child asking her what made her pies taste like home. By the 4th week, a local blogger, a quiet woman who loved neighborhood stories, posted a brief review. Nina's Nook, pie that feels like Sunday. The comment thread filled with hearts and small-town recommendations. Nina read it twice in the stockroom, breath catching like a small bell. The review did something dangerous and beautiful. It reminded her she had value independent of the story that had tried to define her. She also learned small independent steps. She took her car to a mechanic and negotiated the price. She set up a simple ledger for her pie earnings. She moved small savings into an envelope labeled Future Oven. Each task stitched a seam in the life she was mending. On quiet nights, when the restaurant closed and the lights dimmed to sleepy amber, she would clip the little golden bell Nolan had given her onto a ribbon and tie it in the small pocket of her apron. The sound was private and steady, a punctuation that said, "I made this for myself, and I can keep it." Nolan, meanwhile, could not sleep. He woke in the small hours with the memory of her walking away across the snow, suitcase dragging. He replayed every small hesitation, every time he'd let the phone ring first. The board's language, optics, liability, shareholders, had a new taste, metallic and cold. The cost of his caution was not a quarterly report. It was a person. Amanda watched him with a tenderness that had nothing to do with his portfolio. "You look different," she said one morning as they walked the corridor to the office. "You look like you're grieving." "I'm not grieving," he answered, because grief sounded theatrical coming from a man whose grief had always been catalogued under consequence. But Amanda had seen executives break before. She'd seen loneliness carve hard lines into faces that once had soft planes. She did not press. She did what she did best. She cleared a path and made a meeting happen. Instead of burying himself in damage control, he did something that surprised even him. He canceled a PR stunt that the marketing team had been planning, a glossy charity launch tied to a celebrity chef, and replaced it with something quieter and more genuine. He wanted to risk investor ire for something that felt honest. The decision led to friction. A few board members grumbled. "Brand consistency," one said. "Timing," another warned. Nolan listened. Then he printed out a brief and sent a short note. "We will proceed with authenticity. If you want optics, buy a mirror." But a man who'd always equated control with safety needed more than a press release. He needed to remember the person he had been before profits sharpened his edges. So he called an old friend. Auda, who'd grown up on the same street as Nolan and now ran a modest nonprofit that fixed public school playgrounds. They met in a cramped diner at 8 a.m., coffee steaming from battered mugs. Jonah looked the same, laugh lines around his eyes, hands that had built things, not spreadsheets. "You look like hell," Jonah said, because that was how old friends spoke. "And you look like you do this on purpose," Nolan shot back, softer than a retort. Jonah listened to the story, the tabloids, the investor calls, the balcony in Aspen. He didn't flinch at the power Nolan described. He didn't lecture. He asked about the person instead. "Does she make you better? No game? No optics?" Nolan found himself telling Jonah things that had been boxed up decades ago, about his father's lectures on perfection, about nights when a younger Nolan sat on a fire escape and counted stars like small ledgers. Jonah didn't offer platitudes. He offered history. You used to build stuff because you wanted to make things that last, not because you wanted headlines, Jonah said quietly. You're a good builder, Nolan. Don't be the kind who abandons his tools because someone shouted he should. It was small. It was humble. It landed. For the first time in weeks, Nolan felt a different kind of courage fermenting. Not the brash, bottom-line courage, but a steadier, ethical one. He started to act on it. He redirected part of the marketing budget into an emergency relief fund he quietly established, not for his reputation, but because the city shelters Jonas had called about needed support. He announced the foundation in a terse memo that he didn't trumpet. Porter Community Fund, immediate relief for urban food insecurity. It upset a few investors, sure, but it surprised more than one local organizer who'd been quietly pleading for years. He also began, awkwardly, to practice apologies. Not the slick, public kind, but the kind that sounded like someone who was trying to understand what they'd broken. He rehearsed sentences in the car, in empty conference rooms, phrases that tried to balance truth without theatrical sacrifice. He didn't know if they'd be enough. Both of them earned small, practical triumphs. Nina's pies began to sell out hours after she set up the sign. People began requesting the lemon tart as if it were a town heirloom. Carol brought a picture of a column clipped from the local paper. Neighborhood baker brings comfort back to Maple Street. Nina pressed the clipping into a drawer like a passport. At Porter Tower, the foundation announcement rippled in places Nolan had forgotten mattered. A few hardline investors made noise, a phone call, a raised eyebrow. But a handful of community leaders called with real thanks. A shelter manager sent Nolan a message with the names of children who'd receive hot meals next month. The names were small, exact, human. In the quiet of his office, Nolan printed out an anonymous email from a teacher. Thank you for the meals. We used them to feed kids after school today. One child said it tasted like a hug. He almost laughed out loud at the sentence, shocked by how much that phrasing hurt and healed at once. Nolan decided he needed to try. Not for the headlines, not for optics, but to be present where it mattered to her. He called Amanda and gave her one instruction. Find a low-profile, public-friendly moment at a community event where Nina might be. No cameras, no fanfare. Amanda raised an eyebrow, but she loved him enough to help find the smallest possible path back. She found it. A charity bake sale at the community center, where Nina volunteered. It was simple. Tables, kids with sticky fingers, a small stage where local bands played for coins. It was exactly the kind of human place that had made Nina glow when she served soup. He booked a train ticket in the name of a consulting meeting and mapped the route in his head, like a man planning an honest attack. One that aimed for the heart. On the morning he planned to go, his inbox exploded with investor memos and an angry note from a board member. Amanda's voice trembled for a second when she told him, They want a call. They want a statement. They want you to stay. He felt the old weight of obligation descend like a fog. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone. Then he pictured Nina's face at the bake sale, the way a child had looked at her lemon tart the first week, reverence and fierce gratitude intertwined. He imagined the small, private bell on her apron catching sunlight. He straightened his shoulders and leaned toward the sane, awkward courage he'd been carving out. He dialed Amanda back. Reschedule it, he said. I'm going to the community center. I'm doing this my way. Amanda was silent for one long beat. Then, Okay, I'll hold the fort. But Nolan, be careful. He smiled without humor. I will. He picked up his coat. Snow flurries began to fall as if they, too, were waiting to see which way the world would tilt. What's about to come next? Nolan planned a quiet, genuine apology in front of a crowd who didn't care about brands, and he would have to choose between his old life and a chance to be the kind of man who showed up. Would he find her at the bake sale? Would she be ready to see him? Snow dusted the sidewalk in thin, white ribbons as Nolan Porter stepped out of the rideshare and stood across the street from the Maple Street Community Center. His breath formed pale clouds in the cold air. He could hear the chatter from the bake sale before he even reached the entrance. Children shrieking with sugar highs, volunteers laughing, the hum of low-budget speakers playing holiday music 10 days too late. His heart wasn't beating normally. It was stumbling, stuttering, trying to talk him out of this. He had faced boardrooms full of men who could bankrupt continents. He had never been this scared. He crossed the street, coat fluttering behind him. He really thought he could slip in quietly, unnoticed. He was wrong. A teenager carrying a tray of cupcakes looked up, gasped, and whispered, "That's Nolan Porter." Another kid dropped a cookie. Someone else's phone flashed on. And then, as if summoned by the scent of scandal, 2 paparazzi from a local gossip site appeared out of nowhere, cameras raised. Nolan tensed, instinct screaming at him to turn around. But he didn't. He kept walking. Inside the community hall, the smell of pies, cinnamon, and too many bodies mixed in a warm fog. Folding tables sagged under the weight of baked goods. Handmade signs fluttered. And in the far left corner, wearing a flour-smudged apron, Nina was arranging slices of lemon tart. She was laughing at something a child said. Her hair was in a messy bun, strands escaping. The bell charm Nolan had given her peeked out of her apron pocket. She hadn't seen him yet. Good. He needed 3 seconds to build up courage. Then she turned. Her smile collapsed. "Nolan?" Her voice cracked softly. Nearby volunteers froze. Conversations thinned. Phones lifted. The paparazzi positioned themselves for drama. He swallowed, stepped closer. Hands raised slightly as if approaching something fragile. "Hi, Nina." She blinked. 1,000 emotions flickered behind her eyes. Surprise, hurt, frustration, the instinct to protect herself. She wiped her hands on her apron automatically, even though the flour stains remained. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. "Trying," Nolan said. "Very badly. To fix what I broke." He didn't try to touch her. Didn't reach for her hand. He just stood in front of her, coat dusted with snow, eyes raw with sincerity. "Nina, I know I hurt you," he said. "Not because you weren't enough, but because I wasn't brave enough." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. He exhaled hard. "I've spent years making decisions that look perfect on paper. Decisions that protect my company, protect my family, protect my image. And somewhere along the line, I started thinking those decisions were the same as protecting myself." The room quieted. People who pretended not to listen leaned closer. "When we were in Aspen," Nolan continued, "and the tabloids ran that stupid story, I panicked. Not because of you, because I recognized how fast I was falling. And when I fall, Nina, it scares the hell out of me." A woman in the crowd whispered, "Oh God, this is better than Netflix." Nolan ignored her. "My father," he said, voice lower, "was a man who demanded control. Every aspect of our lives. My mother stayed with him until he died, not because she loved him, but because she believed stability mattered more than happiness. I grew up watching what happens when someone loves without boundaries and someone else exploits it." He swallowed. "So the moment I realized I cared for you, really cared, all of those childhood walls slammed back into place. I reacted like a coward. I tried to count risks instead of moments. I chose the safe decision instead of the right one." Nina's eyes glistened. Not anger. Bane. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why come here today? I'm here because I would rather be a flawed man who shows up than a perfect man who hides." She didn't rush into his arms. Instead, she stepped back slightly, hugging her elbows. "Nolan, I'm not asking for luxury or flights to Aspen, or to fit into a world that doesn't want me. I need consistency. If you're scared, say it. If you need time, say it. But don't disappear and then expect one apology to stitch everything back together." "I'm not expecting that," he said softly. "I need proof," Nina continued. "Not money, not jewelry, not headlines. Just a person who doesn't run the moment things get hard." Nolan nodded, as if the requirement physically hurt him. Then let me show you. One day at a time, however long it takes. She looked down at her flour-dusted shoes. She was softening, but not surrendered, and that, unknowingly, made him love her even more. A voice suddenly sliced through the heavy moment. Well, look at this. A local columnist, Sandra Vale, known for biting celebrity commentary, stepped forward, notebook raised. She was already smiling like she had her headline. Mr. Porter, is this the part where you parade your normal girl in front of us to fix your reputation? Another billionaire goes human PR stunt? Nina froze. Nolan straightened sharply. You must be joking, he said. Sandra arched a brow. Oh, come on. The city's been buzzing since Aspen. A fling with a waitress? The richest eligible bachelor suddenly in love? It's convenient. Very convenient. The crowd murmured. Nina's face paled. Hurt. The old kind. Flickered. And Nolan snapped. He took one step forward. Not aggressive, but protective. Sandra, he said evenly, Nina is not a PR stunt. She is not a strategy. She is not a distraction. She is a woman with more strength, compassion, and integrity than anyone in that boardroom you think defines me. Sandra blinked, surprised. Nolan continued, louder this time, addressing the room, and maybe the city behind it. If you want a story, here it is. I fell for a woman who doesn't care about my name, my money, or my power. A woman who works harder in one shift than most of us do in a week. A woman who made me realize I've been living my life backwards, chasing respect from people who don't even know me. Nina stared at him, stunned. And if anyone in this room, or in this city, or in the press thinks I'm ashamed of that, Nolan said, raising his chin, then they don't know me at all. A silence. Then, applause, sprinkled at first. Then fuller. Sandra lowered her notebook. Nolan turned back to Nina, breathing hard. That's my answer, he said softly. I don't hide you. Not anymore. If you're listening to this amazing story, comment below. Team Nina or Team Nolan. Because this moment changes everything. Just as Nina opened her mouth, maybe to forgive him, maybe to ask for space, Nolan's phone buzzed urgently in his coat pocket. The screen glowed with a name that had haunted the last month of his life. Mother. Emergency. His stomach sank. Nina saw his expression shift. Go ahead, she whispered. Answer it. He hesitated, torn between two worlds, one fragile, one familiar. Then he answered. Nolan. His mother's voice crackled through the line, shaken. It's your uncle. The board is calling an emergency vote tonight. If you don't come now, you might lose everything. He closed his eyes. Everything. Except the one thing in front of him. He lowered the phone slowly. Nina stared, heart pounding. Nolan, she said quietly. What are you going to do? He looked at her, torn so deeply it physically showed. And that's where this chapter ends. Because what's about to come next is the moment that will decide everything. The first snow after the crisis fell like a benediction, slow, forgiving, frosting the city in soft promise. Nolan sat in his car for a full minute, watching flakes collect on the windshield, thinking about the small, brave choices that had gotten him here. He thought about how easy it had been, for so long, to choose the thing that looked safest on paper. He also thought about how hard it felt, and how wrong, when the safest choice cost somebody he loved. He stepped out and walked, coat collar up, not toward a boardroom this time, but toward a conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and nervous breath. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras angled like watchful birds. The board members had convened in person for an emergency meeting that evening, and Nolan had gone because he had to show up for more than the numbers. He had to do it with her beside him. Inside, the room buzzed with a different kind of tension. Screens lit with tickers. Voices fell into their business cadences. Amanda gave him a look, one that spoke of exhaustion and relief in equal measure, and then pointed toward the wooden crate near the back door. He turned. Nina stood by the crate, hair in its habitual messy bun, a boxed wine tucked under one arm like contraband. Around her, volunteers from the community center stood in aprons, and a table of lemon tarts and pies glowed under the fluorescent lights. She looked oddly, wonderfully out of place, like a lighthouse in a boardroom. "Morning," she said in that voice that could make the ordinary feel like an invitation. "I thought if you're going to spend the day saving companies, you might appreciate something a little less formal. Boxed wine heals many wounds." Nolan's mouth twitched. The old, brittle version of him would have been embarrassed. The new one, the one he was trying to be, moved to stand beside her. A murmur ran around the room. "Is this a PR stunt?" one director asked, snide. "If it is," another replied, "it's the strangest stunt ever." Nolan stepped forward. "No stunt," he said, simple and firm. "She's here because she's been here for me, and because she's been here for the community. I invited her because I wanted her with me. She didn't come for cameras. She came because she cares." He looked at her then, and she smiled, small, private, and true. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. It was no longer the CEO putting on an exhibition. It was two people deciding to be visible together. The meeting stretched and bent under pressure. One of the largest investors demanded a hardline response. A news outlet had questions about liability. There were spreadsheets with blood on them, and the kind of sterile worry that calcifies into policy if not addressed with human voice. Halfway through, a reporter shoved a microphone forward, hungry for spectacle, and asked a sharp question about the optics of Nolan's personal life influencing stock price. Before Nolan could formulate a corporate answer, Nina raised her voice, steady and kindly. "Listen," she said, and the room quieted because she had a way of speaking that cut through the noise. "I work at a restaurant, and I volunteer. I don't know much about profit margins, but I know the people who line up at the community center for a hot meal. Money that feeds a kid for one night is better than a headline about a rich man's love life. If you want optics, look at these pies. They've fed 60 people this month." There was a beat, then another. The reporters blinked. A few board members shuffled papers, their expressions softening involuntarily. It was a ridiculous human intervention. Boxed wine, lemon tarts, and a woman who refused to be invisible. It changed the temperature of the room. When the meeting adjourned, the minutes were kinder, the tone different. The box of wine became a small, private joke between Nolan and a handful of board members who had watched him choose humanity over image. And that, oddly, mattered. After the emergency calls and the investor whispering settled into manageable noise, Nolan began a series of small, deliberate acts to weave Nina into the hum of his life. First, he introduced her to the executive assistant staff, men and women who had once been a barrier between him and the world. He walked her through the glass offices, explaining with humility some of the projects he'd once wielded as shields. He didn't make grand speeches. He handed out introductions like small gifts. Nina, a woman who makes the best pies you'll ever taste. Nina, someone who volunteers at our community center. The staff were skeptical at first, then curious. Then, gradually, they were allies. He invited her to the building's staff lounge at a quiet hour and showed her a box of things he'd kept from childhood. A scorched action figure with its arm melted in a summer lawnmower accident. A crumpled baseball ticket from a game where it had rained so hard the scoreboard went dark. A photograph of a small Nolan making a paper sailboat with his father. He was careful, gentle, and he explained with a voice that made these objects look less like trophies and more like maps of a boy who had become a man in pieces. "These are the things that matter to me," he said, letting vulnerability be the thread that tied them together. "I want you to know them." Nina ran a finger over the faded ticket. "You had this?" she asked, incredulous and delighted. "I didn't want to forget what joy felt like when it was simple," he said. "I'm trying to remember more of that." He began to pull staff into community efforts she cared about, not as a PR move, but as a way to create a bridge. He handed small grants to the community center without fanfare. He sponsored a weekend of free meals. He started a modest fund to help local entrepreneurs like Nina scale. Each act was quiet and stubborn and profoundly practical, making room for a life that could include both of them. The moment everyone had been waiting for, and that he had feared and hoped and rehearsed in his head, came on a soft afternoon when Nolan and Nina visited his mother for tea. Elaine's house had been a place of protocol and velvet, but the conversation that began was unvarnished and honest. Nolan sat close to his mother, and Nina made tea because that, for her, was a way of showing care. They spoke about his father, about the pressure that had always settled like a second skin around Nolan's shoulders. Elaine listened, and then, to Nina, she said something that would change everything. "Nina," Elaine said quietly, "when I first met you, I was frightened because there is a world I understand, and one I don't. But I see how you look at my son. You make him laugh. You make him remember things that are worth more than contracts. For that, you have my blessing." The words were simple. Their impact was volcanic. A friend of Elaine, visiting that day, recorded the exchange on her phone, thinking it a personal moment to store. She posted it later with a small caption, "When love is real, classes melt." The clip spread like warmth. People shared it without cynicism. Columnists who had sniffed for scandals wrote about a mother who understood the measure of her son's joy. The viral moment did something that no press release could. It humanized Nolan in a way his company's quarterly reports never had. The internet's appetite briefly shifted from scandal to something quieter. The authenticity of two people trying, clumsily and perfectly, to build a life together. The real climax did not come in fireworks. It came at a small table in Nina's kitchen, the neon of the city a soft halo outside the window. Nolan had invited her over that evening, insisting on cooking, which meant takeout that he insisted on arranging properly, and little attempts at reading recipes like a man learning a new language. They ate, clumsy and joyful, and then he reached into his coat and produced a simple envelope. "I don't want to make a spectacle," he said. "I want to make something that lasts." Inside the envelope was a neat, official document, a modest, legally sound offer. Funding to start Nina's Nook properly, a small, no-strings loan to buy a better oven, and a proper storefront, and an agreement to transfer a small portion of the Porter family's garden land, a community space his family had underutilized, into a public garden and bakery cooperative managed by Nina and the neighborhood. Nina stared. "This is enormous," she whispered. "I know," Nolan said, "and I don't expect you to decide tonight. I'm not buying you. I'm offering partnership. I want to share power with you, and I want to make space where your work is respected as work, not as a sideshow." Tears blurred the edges of Nina's view. It wasn't the money that struck her, though it would change the scale of her life. It was the offer of equality, the hand extended to build something together. "I don't want you to mortgage yourself for me," she said. "You're not a project," he said softly. "You're my person." She laughed, breathless. "You always had a way with paperwork." "No jokes," he warned, smiling. "Just, will you try this with me? Will you let me stand beside you while you build?" She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. The city outside blinked under an honest snow. "Yes," she said, and the word landed like a quiet triumph. They stepped outside afterward, hands brushing as they walked. Snow began to fall again, larger this time, clean as forgiveness. She watched him as he fumbled with his scarf, then stopped and looked nervous in a way he hadn't been in years. "What's wrong?" she asked. He took a breath. He stepped close. There was no speech rehearsed, nothing public, only the hush of two people on a sidewalk lit by street lamps. "I want to ask you something," he said, voice low. "But I don't want to make it a show. I want it to be right. I want to know if you'll keep choosing this home with me. Not because I'm asking you to give up anything, but because I can't imagine not trying." Nina smiled, eyes bright and wet. "Are you proposing?" she teased, though she wanted to know the answer too. He laughed softly, nervousness melting. Maybe one day. But tonight, will you keep choosing me? Will you stand with me when things are hard? Will you let me stand with you too? She looked at the falling snow, at the city, at the small envelope in his pocket that now felt less like a contract and more like a promise. Yes, she said again, firmer this time. I will. They hugged, not the public kind meant for cameras, but the private kind that seals things in bones. And elsewhere, on a phone screen, in a newsroom, in a social feed, the small, ordinary moments were already turning into a new headline. Billionaire chooses love over optics, and it looks like authenticity wins. Snow continued to fall, and the world seemed, for once, to be listening. What's about to come next? One final test waits, quiet, human, and intimate, that will ask them to prove that promise isn't just a headline. Would you like me to continue with the story, Rings and Ravioli, next? A year later, the snow had a different sound. It no longer felt like an accusation or a countdown. It was a soft, ordinary wrapping paper that made the city look like something ready to be opened rather than something about to break. Nolan watched it fall from the kitchen window while Nina stirred a pot of tomato sauce on the stove, the room smelling like basil, garlic, and second chances. They had learned how to be gentler people together. Not perfect, not stage-ready, just humbly, stubbornly human. The house they'd chosen wasn't a mansion nor a tiny cottage. It was an old row house with wide windows and a backyard that once belonged to a neighbor's dog. They painted the front door a bright, ridiculous yellow because Nina insisted on something that made the mail carrier grin. The interior held Nolan's childhood memento box tucked onto a shelf in the study. Nina's apron hooks hung by the pantry. Mr. Whiskers had appointed himself mayor of the couch and had adjusted, grudgingly, to the new rules that involved children's toys. Nina's bakery, Nina's Nook, had a queue on Saturday mornings that could make a banker rethink priorities. The storefront was small but tidy, painted the color of lemon tart, with a chalkboard sign that read, "Pie today, joy tomorrow." She hired Lily to run social media. Lily insisted on calling it content magic, and brought her mother, Carol, on as head taste tester and morale officer. The community garden on a patch of land Nolan had arranged to transfer flourished with tomatoes and basil, and kids from the neighborhood learned the meaning of patience while waiting for seedlings to grow. Nolan still had Porter Tower to run, quarterly reports to stare down, and a board that sometimes grumbled. But the board meetings began to include brief discussions about community investments and small programs that fed children during the winter holidays. Amanda, ever practical, slightly exhausted, the tether to reality, sat at his side with the same watchful affection. She teased him less about his shirts and more about whether he was remembering to take time off. When Nolan missed a staff birthday because he'd taken the day to help at a soup kitchen, Amanda sent him a single-message gif. Good human. He kept it pinned. The press, which once circled like sharks, now wrote softer pieces. Not all of them were flattering, and some were still hungry for headlines. But the viral clip of Elaine's blessing had changed the tenor in small, complicated ways. Reporters sometimes came to Nina's bakery and bought a lemon tart in person, and they often left with crumbs on their notebooks and a different kind of story in their pens. Christmas came back around, a year later, and with it a different kind of ritual. Nolan and Nina decided on something small. No guest list with gatekeepers, no hall glimmering for cameras. They wanted something that felt like both of their families. Messy, warm, honest. On a Tuesday evening, with snow falling in wide, slow flakes, they invited those who mattered most over. Carol and Lily, Amanda, who arrived with an industrial-looking travel mug and an expression that said she'd brought spreadsheets for the dessert, a few neighbors from Maple Street, and Nolan's mother, Elaine, who came with a dish of her famous shortbread and an unexpected softness in her eyes. Even Judy from the community center, a woman who'd once fussed at Nolan for lending workers to a garden project, showed up with a knitted scarf. They gathered at Nina's kitchen table. It was small and slightly sticky from years of flour and life and secrets. Nolan had placed a tiny ring on the table earlier, Not flashy, not enormous. A simple band that caught light like a promise. Nolan stood first, clearing his throat in a way that made everyone lean in, because when Nolan cleared his throat, something important was about to be said. "Nina," he began, voice steady but tender. "A year ago, I sat alone at a table and thought the world had turned its back on me. Then you sat with me. You invited me where I'd never been invited. You taught me how to be visible in all the ways that matter. You asked for proof, not presence. So I tried to show up." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I can't promise I'll always be brave. I can promise I will choose you, again and again, and I will choose this life we are building together, with all its messy honesty. Will you keep choosing me?" Nina laughed, a small happy sound that sounded like the bell charm on her bracelet. She squeezed his hand back, face radiant with tears. "I already did," she said simply. "But yes, I'll keep choosing you." They slid the ring onto each other's fingers in that small kitchen, surrounded by mismatched chairs and the people who'd kept them honest. Amanda pretended to look official as she declared the ceremony valid. Carol clapped like an ant at a pageant. Lily filmed the end on her phone and waved it at strangers like spoils. There was no press, no photographers. Only the soft chorus of voices and the clink of cutlery. Later, after cake that wasn't from a bakery and too much boxed wine, a nod to the early, strange days, Nolan found himself looking at an empty chair across the table and laughed, a full, surprised laugh that startled even him. "You remember that seat?" he said to Nina, who jingled her bell earrings as she reached for another slice. "The one that was empty when it mattered the most?" She nodded, mouth full. "I do. It looks better with you in it." They pulled out the old console for a game of Mario Kart. Children shrieked with glee as controllers were passed around. Nolan, surprisingly, was no longer the awkward beginner. He'd learned some moves, with a lot of coaching, and took a shameful victory from Lily that she promised to avenge next year. Mr. Whiskers jumped onto Nina's lap and purred like a small engine. Captain Cuteness watched from the windowsill with a regal disinterest. The room smelled like gravy, pie, and the slow burn of a life that had been stitched back together intentionally. Nolan's mother sat beside him and nodded toward Nina. "You chose well," she said softly. He looked at Nina and then at the people around them, and a quiet gratitude rose in his chest. The empty chair was no longer a symbol of abandonment, but of the way spaces could fill, with people who stayed. If this story warmed you, if you felt Nolan's struggle or Nina's stubborn light, show it. Like, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs a little hope tonight. Tell us where you watched from in the comments, and rate this story from 0 to 10. We read them all. If you're Team Nina or Team Nolan, shout it out below. What's about to come next? Life, of course. Maybe a bakery expansion. Maybe a sequel. Nina and Nolan, the bakery that changed a city. Maybe a little human drama about who ate the last slice of pie. Stay tuned. They finished the night quietly, the house emptied of guests, the last of the cake boxed up and labeled for neighbors. Nina opened a pot of leftover ravioli, a silly ritual they'd kept from the night they first met. No one could explain why ravioli became sacred, but it had. Steam rose in soft spirals as they sat at the kitchen table, hands touching across the plate. Snow fell beyond the window, lights softened into halos. Their hands met over a bowl of ordinary food, and in that small domestic touch, the city outside seemed less jarring, more like a place where people could make mistakes and then return, hungry, for another helping. He lifted her hand and kissed the back of it, the ring catching the light like a private sun. "Home," he whispered. "Home," she agreed, and the word folded itself into the night like a warm blanket. And that was enough. Thank you for listening and watching. If you loved this, remember to like, subscribe, share, and tell me where you watched from. Rate it in the comments. I'll be here with more stories. The next one might start with a lost letter, a mistaken identity, or a recipe that turns a neighborhood upside down. What's about to come next? We'll find out together.